Hello everyone. Since the last recording, I've realized something, and that is a weapon tier list shouldn't exist for New World. All weapons in this game have their purpose, and another thing too is that each weapon suits a particular playstyle. A person who is really good at a playstyle can beat another person who may not be as good or equal to that playstyle with their particular weapon. This is something that I think is often overlooked. This will be supported by a Google document yet again. I worked with a couple of different people to kind of give you a summary of all of this. But what I will share here on my recording won't be an echo of that. I'll share some different thoughts that didn't get put in the Google document because, that document was created with a collective group thought, whereas this is going to be more of my individual thoughts. So yes, be sure to look for the Google document as at least a summary or a alternative viewpoint to it. One other thing too that I wish to cover is theorycrafting. Theorycrafting is an old term. It means to basically think of a build and then create a build that will either test the limits or bring a build to its best point. When it comes to theorycrafting, the thing you have to understand is it takes many mistakes and many different versions of that build before that build reaches its apex. What makes you a good theory crafter is accepting that those mistakes will happen and not giving up. Because if you sit there and say, this didn't really work well, it's trash, throw in the garbage. No, that's not how to be successful at theory crafting. You have to accept that those mistakes will happen, and you have to learn from those mistakes and figure out how to work around them. That's how to be a good theory crafter. I think that I've reached that point in my theory crafting. It will take me many versions to create a build, but I'm very good at accepting mistakes. In past recordings where where people have pointed out my mistakes, I would like to think that I approach them respectfully and civilly and acknowledge that I screwed up. But anyways, yeah, so that's theory crafting. Okay, so in order for me to list the best weapons for PvE and PvP based on my opinion, I need to first talk about bow versus musket. Okay, so the thing to realize with the bow is it has the fast attack and then it has a charged heavy attack. When the bow has its charged heavy attack going, you'll notice that the arrow glows white. That's when it's going to do the most damage at 170% base. But once you get to aim true, I see I didn't pull up the bow skill tree, but whatever. Once you get to aim true, it says that the heavy attacks fly faster and cause 30% more damage. So you're taking that 170 now to 200%. That means that the bow has more damage using a heavy attack than the musket. However, if the bow is using a standard attack, then it's going to do less damage than the musket. That's where the musket shines, is being an in-between. It's better than the standard attack from the standard fast attack from the bow, but it's not as good as the heavy attack. So that's kind of how you have to think about the two weapons in terms of damage. Now, in terms of usability, that's a different story. Unfortunately, in PvE, it's impossible to use the musket at 50 meters because if you hit an enemy, it's just going to chase you to a certain distance and then immediately retreat, heal, and your bullets are wasted. That means that the bow is a little bit better at PvE than the musket because it's doing very high damage and it doesn't require you to be very far. So that's kind of like the difference between PvE and PvP. But as far as PvP is concerned, the difference between the musket and the bow become exponentially different. In PvP, your chances of running into a shield user is going to be present. The bow does very low stamina damage, and it takes multiple arrows to break that shield. Odds are that you're not going to be able to break the shield, because with the bow, you have to be so dang close that you're taking a huge risk of being attacked or run down or something. So you may not have the time to do your heavy attack to try to get past that shield. The other thing too to keep in mind is that when you're using the bow's aim ability, it narrows your cone of vision by a considerable margin. Whereas with the musket, its ability to do damage at range is going to be a lot better than the bow, because it's got a passive to increase its stamina damage to 106. And on top of that, its auto attacks, once you get ballistic advantage, do full damage at 50 meters or greater. So with the musket, you have a better cone of vision than the bow, because you're staying so far back that you're more than likely going to be aware of any enemies within the cone in front of you. That's how you kind of have to think about musket versus bow. So with that out of the way, I could go ahead and talk about which weapons I think are the best. Starting with PvP. So on the PvP list, because we just talked about range, I'll go and start there. So for PvP, obviously musket, and I just explained the reasons why. I have a musket build here that is specifically geared towards PvP, although I guess it can be used for PvE as well. But I would think that the bow would be better at the PvP or PvE aspect. So this particular build, the one I'm using as an example, may not be my best build, so I'm not going to like recommend this build. But you can see it has ballistic advantage, and it has weakened defenses on it. The idea here is to use your auto attacks at 50 meters, and then if the enemy decides to run that 50 meters at you, which is highly unlikely, but if it happens, then you're to use stopping power to push them back, and then you use sticky bomb when they get pushed back. Sticky bomb has very short range, but it is fire damage, which means that it's going to do a brutal amount of elemental damage instead of physical. That's the one great thing about sticky bomb. In addition to that, both stopping power and sticky bomb have a combination of debuffs that will make it difficult for that enemy to advance the final 3 meters, which is how far back stopping power pushes them. So yes, that's a musket for PvP. Now, as far as the other PvP weapons are concerned, let me tab over. Let's see. Oop, wrong one. There we go. Okay, so as mentioned, I think the best ranged weapon is going to be musket. For best tank in PvP, I think that's going to be the Warhammer. As mentioned in my prior recording, the Warhammer has access to a passive that reduces the stamina damage when blocking melee attacks. It also has a 10% damage reduction when in proximity of 2 or more enemies. Then finally, it has a 10% damage reduction when sprinting. So while the Warhammer may not be able to chase down enemies effectively, the one thing it's very good at is being a bully, because it has the damage reduction to either fling itself into a group or to bully ranged users, whether they be archers or mages. So if you see a mage or archer, you just run at them, and they're going to start backing up, which is to be expected. But that's okay. You know, the point is to push them back or use psychological warfare on them to say, well, you're not getting anywhere near my group, because if you do, I will run at you. And that's kind of how you have to play with Warhammer and PvP. But yes, it's much better at tanking, and this particular build here has all the passives mentioned, the stamina damage reduction, the 2 ability absorbs, and then it has a host of debuffs along with more damage against debuffed enemies. So, yep, that's your standard Warhammer build. I don't think, honestly, I can do any better than this build, so I guess if you want to use it, feel free to, but the musket build I might need to refine. So yeah, moving on. Let's see. I need to tab to... Oh, no, that's PvE. Okay. Okay. I'll get into Rapier here in a bit, but as far as magic damage is concerned, that's going to be Fire Staff or Ice Gauntlet. Ice Gauntlet's not going to do the damage of the Fire Staff, and the Fire Staff just has so much raw damage, but the main difference between the two is the defensive nature of it. With the Ice Gauntlet, you have access to Entomb, so what you can do is you can throw down your pylon and Ice Storm, and then hide in your Ice Pylon and let the two do damage to the enemy. That's something that you can do with that. Actually, one other thing, too, that I'm surprised people haven't caught on to yet is the Ice Pylon being used as a shield. This is going to take some thought process and mind bending to understand this, but with the Ice Pylon, it has a lot of HP, and in this game, weapons are directional. So what you can do is if you have a melee user chasing you, you can play Ring Around the Rosie with the Ice Pylon. More than likely, as you're running around the Ice Pylon and they're swinging at you, the chances of their melee weapon hitting the Ice Pylon is going to be quite high. As far as ranged users are concerned, that's an even easier proposition. What you do is you hide behind the Ice Pylon, and then when you feel comfortable coming out to attack, then you just do that. So yes, in PvP, Ice Gauntlet is far more defensive than Fire Staff. So something to keep in mind. And also, the Ice Staff pairs the Ice Gauntlet pairs really well with something like the Rapier, which I'll get into in a little bit. But anyways, so as far as physical damage is concerned, that's going to be, of course, the Great Axe. People have said that the Great Axe is overpowered, and I highly disagree with that. It does a lot of damage, yes, and I think that's going to get changed here at some point, but the Great Axe doesn't have any defensive capabilities like the Warhammer does. It's very easy, assuming that you are skilled in your weapon, to outplay a Great Axe. You just have to be aware that it does a lot of damage and you don't want to get hit by it. And there are a couple of ways to handle that. Spear is a good counter because of Leg Sweep or Vault Kick. Warhammer has an AoE stun and damage absorption, so either one can break a Great Axe quite easily. Rapier can do it, but it requires a higher skill ceiling than Spear or Warhammer. So, yeah, I don't think that Great Axe really is doing all that great. Once you start seeing it being up against players who know their stuff. So, yeah, that's Great Axe. As far as a weapon to pair with the musket in PvP, I would say you could do Rapier or Spear. AoE is not as important in PvP, and also a lot of the AoE skills for a lot of weapons don't really do a lot of damage anyways. So it's really not going to do much for you unless it has something like a stun attached to it, or a knockback, or slow, or something. So, and even then, you know, if you're really good at your positioning, you can avoid that situation altogether. But either way, the Spear is going to be a lower skill requirement than the Rapier. So it pairs really well with the musket for people who aren't really high skilled with the game. So I would say Spear would probably be better than Rapier for that reason. Both the musket and Spear are dexterity as well. So that's kind of the summary of my thoughts on that whole thing. So yes, let me think. Did I miss any? No, I didn't. Okay, so let me go into PvE now. So, as mentioned prior, the bow does more damage than the musket when using its heavy attack. So, this is where things will switch a little bit, and now the best range becomes the bow, because the bow does have that damage capacity when compared to the musket. I would say, as far as pairing it with a weapon, you could do rapier or spear, but I would say spear, because unlike PvP, AoE is a little bit more important. Due to the fact that you're going to be dealing with people who cause trains, and I'll explain that in a bit, but you have people causing trains and other things. So I would say spear is a safer bet than rapier in PvE because of your ability to do AoE, and also because of your ability to still deal quite a bit of damage. As far as the other weapons are concerned for PvE, everything else applies. The same explanation for fire, staff, and ice gauntlet are the exact same. Great Axe is the exact same. But the one change that you will have in the PvE side is Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield is going to be better at tanking in PvE than the Warhammer, because in PvE you don't have to worry about stamina damage as nearly as much as PvP. A lot of the monsters you run into aren't really going to do a lot of stamina damage to you, so your ability to block is going to be far more valuable than absorbing the damage in PvE. But in PvP, that's a different story, because the chances of you blocking even one attack is going to be pretty slim with a Sword and Shield. But in PvE, more than likely you'll be able to block maybe 5 to 8 attacks, depending on how you're spec'd with your skills. So I would say for PvE purposes, your best tank is going to be Sword and Shield. PvP is going to be Warhammer. So yeah, that kind of covers all of that. Now I have to talk about some of the other weapons. So let me see. Do I have it up on your? Okay, yeah, I do. Okay, so Rapier is a much higher skill ceiling than really any weapon in the game, in my opinion. If you look at its skills, you'll see why. Now, the particular build I have here up on the screen is dual purpose. It can work in PvP. Well, it was geared towards PvP, but it can work in PvE as well. So the reason I have it set this way is because that evade skill under Graves is actually insane, assuming you have the skill to utilize it. So what makes Rapier shine is that evade skill and its DPS. While the Rapier doesn't have very high raw damage, it attacks really freaking fast when it's using its light attacks. So because it's able to attack super quick, it's able to do more DPS than a lot of your weapons in the game. Then you combine that with every other passive that's in there, and you get just an insane combination of skill. So it's a very much high skill, high reward weapon. But I want to focus on evade a little bit here, because there are some things to be aware of with it. So evade does not cost any stamina and has a very low cooldown. And when you start getting all the other passives in the tree, which is if you look at the tree on the blood side, you'll see a passive to the right of Tondo, and that reduces your cooldown by 1% per hit on the enemy. Concerning how fast you attack, I can guarantee you that it's going to stack up pretty quick. And then your other one is at the bottom of the evade tree. It's any light attack, or I'm sorry, it's any attack period reduces its cooldown. So between the two, you can get your evade up pretty quickly. But what's really cool about it is not so much the synergy within the tree, but also the synergy with traits. I have seen 2 traits related to the evade. One is evade itself, called refreshing evade. I've seen this before at 3.5%, and I don't remember the specific wording, but it was, I think, 3.5% of your health is restored when you evade. So think about that for a minute. You have a very low cooldown, reposition or evade that costs no stamina, and you get a free heal in the process. That's an insane combination right there. To make it more insane, there is one that deals with one of the passives below it. Let me point it out. Okay, it's this passive right here, the one that says evading forward, you gain extra damage. There is a trait that deals with that specifically, which says that this bonus applies in any direction you decide to evade in. So if you can get refreshing evade, and then the one for this particular passive that says you can evade in any direction to get the bonus, you have yourself a really great reposition and avoiding tool. The amount of things that you can do with a rapier, assuming you have a quick mind and you have the ability to focus on combat, is just, it's insane what you can do with the rapier. So yes, I don't agree with rapier being bottom tier in these lists. Well, in general, I don't agree with these lists being a thing, but if there were to be a list, I would say rapier is definitely not C tier. It's A tier at best if the person has the skill to fully utilize it. And this build right here, I think, is probably the best you're going to get. But moving on. So healing staff is rated as S tier. I don't see a point in that. I mean, healing is great no matter what, so that really should just be its own category. Oh, and Hatchet. So Hatchet's a really weird one because it has the ability to do either melee or range damage, but the problem is that it's not good in one or the other. Its damage is going to be lower than weapons of its respective category, plus or minus the rapier, because its raw physical damage is going to be higher than the rapier. You'd have to look at how fast it can attack in comparison to the rapier, and then look at the DPS. I would imagine rapier out DPS's Hatchet, but you would have to look at a lot of math to get that. But overall, yeah, just it's a really weird weapon, and I think that honestly, its best purpose in life is to be paired with the Warhammer Great Axe, because that gives you some ranged capacity on those particular builds. I wouldn't rely on the Hatchet for being your main range weapon because of how much stamina it uses, but you could certainly use its abilities to start off the engagement with some damage, and then go into melee range, whack a target, and then if the target runs away, then you can use your Hatchet abilities again, or you can just fling normal thrown attacks at them. And that would be a great way to finish off a fleeing enemy. So I think that's probably where it's best suited, is to be a supporting weapon in situations where either you want to do opening damage or opening damage before going to melee, or trying to finish off a fleeing enemy. I think those are really the two best uses for Hatchet, and there are other people that I've talked to that are in agreement with this theory, so that's kind of my thought process on all of this. But I'll link the Google document and also a really great video by Fexture Life that talks about how to make evade easier by remapping the keys. But that's all I have. Thanks for listening.